Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
On Halloween night in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a group of teenagers decided to test their courage. They had heard rumors about an abandoned house at the edge of town, a place locals whispered about but never dared to enter after dark. People said strange things had been seen there, shadows moving against the windows, faint laughter when no one was inside, and doors that opened on their own. The group arrived just as the sun disappeared, leaving the streets bathed in an eerie orange glow from jack-o'-lanterns. They laughed nervously, trying to mask their fear as they stepped onto the creaking porch. The air inside was cold and stale, carrying the smell of decay and something faintly metallic. Every step echoed through the empty house, and the teenagers' flashlights flickered as if the darkness itself was swallowing the light. In the living room, they found old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. On the walls were drawings, childish at first glance, but twisted and grotesque, figures with hollow eyes, gaping mouths, and bodies that bent in impossible ways. One of the teenagers, a boy named Mark, noticed a small trapdoor under a tattered rug. Against better judgment, curiosity got the better of them, and they opened it. A narrow staircase led down into a basement that smelled of rot and wet earth. As they descended, the temperature dropped sharply, and their breaths hung in the air like smoke. At the bottom, the flashlight beams caught something that made their blood run cold. Dozens of dolls, broken and mutilated, arranged in a circle around a small pentagram etched into the floor. But what terrified them most was that the dolls were positioned to face the staircase, as if they had been waiting for someone to come down. A soft whispering filled the room, low and almost imperceptible, like the sound of someone speaking just out of earshot. Panic set in. They turned to leave, but the staircase had vanished. In its place was a solid wall of darkness that seemed to pulse, breathing like a living thing. One by one, their flashlights died, plunging them into complete blackness. The whispering grew louder, forming words they could almost understand. Stay. Forever. Screams erupted, echoing through the house, but there was no one around to hear them. One by one, the teenagers disappeared into the shadows. When the police arrived hours later, called by parents worried about their children, the house was empty. Not a trace of the group remained, except the pentagram in the basement, now surrounded by new dolls, carefully arranged, their eyes seeming to glint in the faint moonlight that crept through the boarded-up windows. Locals still pass by that street on Halloween, and some swear they hear faint laughter coming from the abandoned house. They warn that if you step inside, you might never come back, and the dolls might be waiting for you too.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 2.
It was a Halloween night in a small town where everyone knew each other, and the air carried the faint scent of decaying leaves mixed with pumpkin spice. People were cautious that year. Something about the town felt off, though no one could quite say what. The local high school had been hosting the same annual haunted house fundraiser for decades, and teenagers were responsible for setting it up. But this year, the rumors started long before Halloween, rumors of a man who had vanished years ago, leaving behind only his house and an unsettling, unexplainable mess inside. Some said he had gone mad, some whispered dark secrets about his obsessions, but the truth was nobody knew. A group of friends, Sarah, Mike, Jenna, and Tom, decided to dare each other to sneak into that old house before the haunted house event. They were thrill seekers, thinking they could handle anything. When they arrived, the house was even worse than the rumors suggested. Windows were shattered, doors hung crooked on their hinges, and the air smelled of rot. The floorboards creaked under their feet like the house was alive, and they joked to keep the fear at bay, but the jokes were hollow. As they explored, they noticed strange symbols etched into the walls, hidden behind layers of grime. Some of the symbols looked like nothing they had ever seen before, and one of them, carved deep into the doorframe of the basement, seemed to almost shimmer in the dim light. A sudden sound, like fingernails scratching the wood, made them freeze. Tom, trying to prove he wasn't scared, pushed the basement door open. Darkness swallowed him instantly. They called for him, but the basement swallowed their voices. Only muffled responses came back. Sarah's phone light flickered as they descended, And when it caught a figure at the bottom, their breath caught in their throats. It wasn't Tom. It was a man or something that looked like him, but wrong. His eyes were empty, sunken, and his mouth moved as if he was trying to speak, but no words came. The thing lunged, and Jenna screamed. Mike grabbed her arm and ran, dragging her up the stairs, leaving Sarah frozen as the thing in the basement reached out, long fingers grazing her shoulder. And she barely escaped when a sudden crash behind her made her stumble into the night. They never saw Tom again. Weeks later, the police searched the house. They found remnants of someone having lived there recently, but no bodies, no evidence of foul play. The basement was completely bare, as if it had never existed. The friends tried to warn the town, tried to tell anyone who would listen, but people thought they were exaggerating, drunk on adrenaline and fear. When Halloween came again, the house had disappeared. No one knew how or why, but the air around the old neighborhood felt colder, and kids whispered about a house that appeared for a night, luring people in, never to be seen again. Sarah, Mike, and Jenna still hear scratching sounds late at night, and sometimes, when they drive past where the house should have been, they swear they see a shadow in the window, waiting. The thing that took Tom, and nearly took them too, was never found, and every year, new rumors appear on Halloween night of someone daring the brave to enter a house that doesn't exist until it does.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 3.
It was Halloween night in a quiet suburban town where the streets were usually alive with laughter and the rustle of leaves. That year, something felt off. The air was heavy, carrying a faint metallic scent that no one could place. Kids ran from house to house, clutching bags of candy, while parents exchanged uneasy glances, shrugging it off as Halloween nerves. A group of teenagers, Mia, Jordan, and Sam, decided to push the night further, daring each other to explore an abandoned house on the edge of town. Locals whispered that the house had been empty for decades, ever since the last owners mysteriously vanished on Halloween night. Windows were boarded, the garden overgrown, and the front door hung slightly ajar as if inviting intruders. As they stepped inside, the air turned icy. Their flashlights barely penetrated the thick darkness. The house smelled of decay, and faint scratches echoed from upstairs. At first, they laughed nervously, attributing the sounds to rats or the creaking house, but soon the atmosphere grew oppressive. Mia noticed old photographs scattered on the floor, families, children smiling, and one photo that chilled her to the bone. A family of 4, eyes blacked out, faces twisted as if frozen in a silent scream. Jordan scoffed, insisting it was just damage over time. But then the scratching upstairs grew louder, deliberate, like nails scraping wood. Curiosity and fear collided, and they climbed the staircase. Every step groaned under their weight. At the top, a single bedroom door stood slightly ajar. When Sam pushed it open, they found a circle of small chairs facing the walls, each smeared with dark stains. On the floor, handprints, tiny human, led to a closet. Against their better judgment, Mia opened the closet door. Inside, dozens of dolls stared back at them, eyes chipped, mouths cracked. Their horror deepened when the dolls' heads slowly turned in unison, following their movements. Jordan froze, whispering that they needed to leave immediately, but the hallway behind them had vanished. The staircase they had climbed was gone, replaced by endless darkness. A whisper floated from the shadows, "Stay forever." Their panic surged. They ran, but every door led back to the same room, the dolls now surrounding them in a tight circle, silent but somehow moving closer. The whispers grew louder, chanting unintelligible words that gnawed at their sanity. Hours, or was it minutes, passed. The night outside seemed endless. When they finally stumbled through a door that led back to the front yard, the house was gone. In its place was an empty lot, overgrown and silent, as if no building had ever stood there. Their screams for help echoed down the street, but no one came. When the police arrived the next morning, there was no trace of the teenagers, not a footprint, not a sound, nothing. Only a single photograph lay in the middle of the lot, 3 teenagers staring into the camera, eyes blacked out, faces frozen in silent terror. Every Halloween since, locals claim they hear whispers on that lot and the occasional faint sound of children's laughter, but no one dares go near it. Some swear the house never really leaves, waiting for the next daring souls to step inside. If you walk by on Halloween night, you might hear the whispers calling your name, and if you do, you may never leave.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 4.
On Halloween night in a quiet suburban town, the streets were alive with the laughter of children and the flicker of jack-o'-lanterns. But in one neighborhood, a house sat dark, its windows shuttered and doors chained. Rumors had swirled for years that no one lived there, yet every Halloween, faint lights glimmered inside, as if someone or something was moving in the shadows. A group of teenagers, daring each other to prove their bravery, decided to explore the house. The air grew colder as they approached, the faint smell of decay creeping into their noses. Their flashlights barely cut through the darkness inside. The floorboards groaned under their weight, each sound echoing like a warning. Walls were plastered with old, yellowed newspapers and strange hand-drawn symbols smeared in a reddish substance that looked suspiciously like dried blood. In the living room, they found a mirror, cracked and covered in dust. One of them, trying to be funny, whispered, "Say something creepy," and knocked 3 times. Suddenly, the air grew heavy, and the room felt impossibly tight. Reflections in the mirror weren't quite right. The teenagers' movements were delayed, distorted, and something behind them moved in ways that no human body could. A scream shattered the tense silence. One of the teens vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a smear of blood on the floor. Panic set in as they realized the door they had entered through wouldn't budge. Windows were fogged over, and faint, wet footsteps echoed from upstairs, though no one had dared go near the staircase. Whispers filled the room, soft at first, then rising in urgency, repeating their names over and over. Desperate, they tried to smash the mirror, hoping it might be the source of whatever malevolent force had claimed their friend. When it shattered, a hand reached out, not from the reflection, but from the broken shards themselves, grabbing another teen with horrifying strength. They were pulled backwards, screaming, into the mirror, which immediately sealed itself as if it had never been broken. Only 2 of them escaped, scrambling out the front door as the house fell silent again. When the police arrived, no evidence of the missing teens remained. No fingerprints, no footprints, no blood. The house looked abandoned, untouched for decades. But in the weeks after, neighbors reported hearing faint laughter on Halloween night and seeing fleeting figures behind those darkened windows. Some claimed to see the missing teens wandering in the yard, their faces pale and eyes hollow, mouthing silent pleas for help before vanishing into the night. To this day, no one dares enter that house. It sits waiting, year after year, patient and hungry, and every Halloween a new group of thrill-seekers hears the same whispers calling their names. Those who ignore the warnings sometimes disappear, leaving only a smear of blood, a shattered mirror, and a story that no one wants to believe. But everyone tells anyway.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 5.
Every year on Halloween, my neighborhood hosted a small but lively trick-or-treat night. Kids running around, porch lights glowing, the usual. But 3 years ago, something happened that everyone pretends never did. The families that lived on Sycamore Lane don't decorate anymore. Some moved away, and no one talks about the girl in the cracked white mask. It started around 9 p.m. when most of the younger kids had already gone home. A group of teenagers was walking door to door, laughing too loudly, shoving each other into bushes. Typical. One of them, a 17-year-old named Derek, lived 2 houses down from me. He would later swear he saw the girl first, but at the time he thought she was just another trick-or-treater. She stood completely still at the end of the sidewalk under a flickering street lamp, wearing a plain black hoodie and a cheap white plastic mask. No decorations, no emos, just the mask, blank except for 2 small horizontal cuts under the eyes and a long vertical crack along the side. She didn't carry a bucket or bag, didn't move, didn't wave, nothing. The teens joked, calling her creepy doll girl, but she didn't react. When they turned to walk away, Derek said she suddenly tilted her head slightly, the way a dog listens to a noise. Subtle but unnatural. They all stopped. One of the girls whispered, "Did she just?" But when they looked again, the girl stood perfectly still. Later that night, adults started noticing her too, standing in different places, first at the corner, then near the park gate, then across the street from the Johnson's house, always alone, always just standing, head slightly tilted. Around 10:15 p.m., Mr. Johnson opened his door to bring in their carved pumpkin. He saw her standing at the far end of his driveway. He asked if she was lost. No response. He started walking toward her, but when he blinked, she wasn't at the driveway anymore. She was suddenly standing beside his mailbox, closer to him. He froze. The street was dead quiet. He backed away and locked his door. People started calling the non-emergency line to report a lost child, a prowler, or a trespasser in a mask. No one knew which category she belonged to. But before police arrived, she vanished. Everyone assumed she went home. But around 1 a.m., something woke the Peterson baby, crying hard enough that Mrs. Peterson got out of bed to check the monitor. When she looked at the screen, she saw her daughter crying in the crib and something else. Behind the crib, in the corner where the camera barely caught the shadows, stood the girl in the white mask. Head down, tilted slightly. Mrs. Peterson screamed so loudly the neighbors heard it. When her husband ran into the room, the baby was alone. No masked girl, no sound except the baby sobbing. Police searched the house. Nothing. No entry point, no broken window, no footprints. They said stress and poor lighting caused misinterpretation. No one bought it. Over the next few days, strange things happened. Pets went missing. Children refused to sleep in their own rooms. Parents kept blinds shut even during the day. And multiple people said they saw a white mask watching them through their windows for just a second, then disappearing. Then came the last sighting. On November 3rd, 3 days after Halloween, a delivery driver reported seeing a girl wandering the wooded trail near Sycamore Creek. He said she moved in short, jerky motions, like she didn't understand how to use her legs properly. He tried calling out to her, thinking she was hurt. She turned to him, and the mask's cracked side split a little wider, as if something beneath it pushed outward. He didn't wait to see what. After that, no one saw her again. But the story didn't end. Every Halloween since, someone on Sycamore Lane reports a new crack in the mask, a new angle of the head tilt, a new sound, soft tapping on windows, faint footsteps on porches long after trick-or-treating ends. The police always blame pranksters, but last year on Halloween night, I saw her myself. I was turning off my porch light about to head inside when I noticed something across the street, a small figure under a street lamp. Black hoodie, white mask. Except this time, the mask wasn't blank anymore. It had a mouth, a wide, jagged, permanent grin carved clean through the plastic. And while the rest of her body was perfectly still, the mouth moved, almost like she was whispering something I couldn't hear, something meant for me. I went inside, locked every door, and I didn't sleep until the sun came up. This year, if you hear tapping on your window, don't look. If you see someone standing too still near the streetlights, don't stare back. And whatever you do, if you see a cracked white mask on Halloween night, don't assume it's a costume. Some stories become traditions. Some traditions never die. And some things, whatever she is, wait all year just to come back.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 6.
It was Halloween night, late October, and the streets were unusually quiet in a small town in Pennsylvania. Most houses were dark, except for the ones with the standard carved pumpkins and flickering candles. A group of teenagers, Mark, Jenna, and Lewis, decided to skip the usual trick-or-treating and explore the woods on the outskirts of town. Rumors had been swirling for years about a man who lived deep in those woods, someone who had been accused of unspeakable acts decades ago. No one knew if he was still alive, but the legend painted him as someone who would lure curious teens into the forest and never let them leave. The three friends laughed nervously as they walked deeper into the trees, the moon barely lighting their path. They were daring each other, trying to seem brave, but the deeper they went, the heavier the silence became. At one point, Mark pointed to a dilapidated cabin they stumbled upon, hidden behind thick brush. Its windows were broken, and the front door hung off its hinges. Despite the warnings in their minds, curiosity overrode fear. Inside, the cabin was musty, filled with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. On the wall, they noticed strange symbols etched into the wood, scratches that looked almost like a combination of letters and numbers. Jenna shivered. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered. But Mark, trying to act fearless, found a small box in the corner. Inside were dozens of old photographs, some black and white, some faded color, of children wearing Halloween costumes, all staring directly at the camera with terrified eyes. Luis laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood, but his laugh died in his throat when he noticed something moving in the shadows behind them. A thin man, unnaturally tall, with pale skin and hollow eyes, stepped out. He didn't speak, didn't move like a normal person, just stared. The air went icy cold, their breaths visible in the dim light. Panic set in instantly. They ran toward the door, but the man moved faster than any human could, appearing in front of them, blocking the exit. Mark tried to push past him, and Jenna screamed as Luis tripped, falling hard on the splintered floor. The man tilted his head like he was studying them, then whispered, though the sound wasn't a normal voice. It was low, gravelly, and somehow inside their heads at the same time. "You shouldn't be here. No one leaves." Suddenly, a loud crash from the back of the cabin drew the man's attention for a moment, enough for the teens to scramble through the window and run blindly into the forest. They didn't stop until they reached the streetlights at the edge of town, panting and covered in scratches and bruises. When they turned back to look at the woods, the cabin was gone. Just trees, dark and silent, like it had never existed. Years later, Mark saw an old newspaper clipping about missing children, dating back decades, all last seen on Halloween night near that very forest. The photographs they found in the cabin were now part of the article, eerily intact. Jenna never celebrated Halloween again, and Luis refused to ever speak about what he saw. The town never reported any new sightings, or maybe no one dared go into those woods again. But every Halloween, when the wind howls through the trees, some swear they see a flicker of light in the forest, a faint figure watching, waiting for the next curious souls to wander in.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 7.
It happened in a small town in the Midwest. Every year, Halloween was a big deal, and the neighborhood kids would flood the streets in costumes, running from house to house. But in 2017, a story began circulating that no one could shake. A group of teenagers decided to explore an abandoned house on the edge of town. The house had been vacant for years, its windows boarded up, but rumors said something terrible had happened there decades ago, an unsolved murder that left the house cursed in the minds of the locals. Most kids stayed away, but this group wanted the thrill. They brought flashlights, their phones, and a sense of bravado that only teenagers possess. They reached the house just after sunset, when the air had begun to chill and the wind rattled the dead trees. The door was locked, but one of the boys managed to pry it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, decay, and something else, something metallic. They joked and laughed nervously as they wandered through the rotting rooms, their flashlights cutting across peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. Then they found the basement. The door creaked open to reveal stone steps descending into darkness. As soon as they stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply. Their flashlights flickered, and the air smelled of iron. One of the girls pointed to something scrawled on the wall in a dark, sticky substance. "Do not leave. Stay with us." The group froze. They thought it was graffiti, a prank left by other kids, but the smell, the feeling of eyes on them, was real. They decided to leave immediately. But as they turned, one of the boys screamed. Something had moved at the bottom of the stairs. They all froze, heartbeats hammering. A figure, thin, pale, impossibly still, stood in the corner. It didn't move its head, didn't blink, just stared. They ran. One by one, they scrambled up the stairs, tripping over debris, coughing in the dusty air. When they finally reached the front door, they found it locked from the outside. Panic set in. They pounded on the door, screaming for help. And then, one of them noticed the shadows moving differently. Shadows that didn't match their bodies, stretching and twisting along the walls. Suddenly, the door swung open on its own. They ran out into the street, gasping, faces pale. When they looked back, the house seemed normal, empty, lifeless. No boarded windows, no dark basement, nothing to suggest the horrors inside had ever existed. The next morning, police searched the house after neighbors reported strange noises overnight. There was no sign of anyone entering the house in years. Nothing in the basement suggested anyone had been there recently, but when one of the teens returned with a flashlight to prove they weren't lying, They found the words on the wall again, fresh, in the same dark, sticky substance. Do not leave. Stay with us. None of the teenagers have ever spoken about what they saw beyond the steps. Some have moved away, some have refused to answer the phone. And every Halloween, locals swear they see figures moving in the windows of that abandoned house. Figures that don't belong there, shadows that shouldn't exist. Even now, years later, the house sits empty. People pass by, windows dark, doors sealed. But some nights, if you're brave enough to walk past, you might hear whispers carried by the wind. Stay, stay.
Everybody like and subscribe and praise the bell icon. Story number 8.
It was Halloween night, and the streets were unusually quiet in the old part of town. Most houses had turned off their lights, and only a few trick-or-treaters wandered past the cracked sidewalks. A group of friends, Mark, Jenna, and Luis, decided to explore a neighborhood everyone avoided. The Harris Street houses. Locals whispered about the abandoned house at the end, saying anyone who entered never came out the same. The house was nothing more than a skeletal frame of its former self. Windows were shattered, doors hung crooked on their hinges, and the smell of decay clung to the air. Ignoring the warnings, they pushed the creaking gate open. Their flashlights cut thin swaths through the darkness, and every floorboard groaned underfoot. At first, it seemed like any ordinary abandoned home, but as they moved deeper, the air grew colder and the silence became suffocating. On the second floor, Jenna noticed something carved into the wall, a series of tiny scratches forming letters that spelled out, "Don't leave." They laughed nervous, brushing it off as some prank left by teenagers. But then they heard it, a faint scratching from above, coming from the attic. "Probably a raccoon," Luis said, trying to steady his voice. They climbed the stairs, each step echoing louder than the last. The attic was small and empty, except for a single chair in the center of the room, facing the wall. On the chair sat a small, hand-carved doll with glassy eyes that seemed to follow them. Mark picked it up, and the moment he did, a door slammed shut behind them. The flashlight flickered, and for a heartbeat, everything went dark. When the light returned, the doll was on the floor, but now it was facing them. Panic set in. They tried the attic door. It wouldn't budge. Scratching sounds multiplied, dots circling the room. Whispers grew, indistinct at first, then clear. "Stay, forever." They banged on the walls, screamed anything to get out. When the door finally swung open, they bolted down the stairs and out of the house, gasping for air. Outside, the street was still empty. Trembling, they looked back at the house, only to see all the windows suddenly filled with those glassy eyes, not dolls, but shadows, hundreds of them, staring. They ran to the nearest neighbor's house and called the police, but by the time officers arrived, the house was completely empty. No doll, no scratches, no sign of anyone ever being there. Weeks later, Mark received a package with no return address. Inside was the same doll, its eyes now cracked and staring straight at him. A note attached simply read, "You forgot something." None of them returned to that street again, and they stopped speaking about what happened. But every Halloween, when the wind is just right and the night grows unnervingly silent, Mark swears he can hear scratching at his window and the whisper, "Don't leave."